So even though I missed a lot of your talk, Ty, I do appreciate your emphasizing rest, because this is our quarter's theme. And this past week, the discussion is about why are we so restless as human beings? We are, and sometimes restless is good. Sometimes restless helps us to accomplish things and not be lazy and sleep all day. But in some sense, it's not good. And why is restlessness not good for Christians? Let me just read the memory verse, which I think gives us an idea. It's James 3:16. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. So we already know jealousy's bad and selfish ambition is bad. But what about just restlessness? What are some synonyms for restlessness that you can think of? Anxiety, yes. Do we have the mic? Why don't you repeat that for the mic for our people at home?
Anxiety.
Anxiety, yeah, that's a good synonym. Any other? Think back to your English thesaurus.
I don't have a synonym, but Jesus says, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So
Rest.
if I'm restless, it means I don't have whatever he's doling out.
Yeah, yes. So anyone else? Any other synonyms for restlessness?
I don't have a synonym, but as a classroom teacher, if the kids are restless, you're in trouble.
Yes. I was going to say the teachers would know what it's like.
That I think unfocused. Your mind is not focused on something when you're restless.
Yeah. You're searching for something. Sometimes it's a specific thing. Other times it's very intangible, where you're just searching. And so it's a very common human trait to be restless, because we tend to think it's always better somewhere else, or it'd be better if we had this thing, or if we, that's just human nature. The grass is greener on the other side. But what happens is, when you think about a root system, when we think of the Bible, what does the Bible talk about as a root of all evil? Love of money. I think we can all say that. So restlessness has roots too, and we know what roots do. They tend to spread. They sprout other things, and so the implications grow, and it becomes worse. And where we live, we have a lot of trees, and so these trees have roots. And what the roots do is they grow into our sewer pipes, and then we get cracked sewer pipes. And then anyway, so when I was talking to the plumber one year, and I said, well, how can the roots go all the way over there? And they said, the roots are bigger than the tree that you see. They go way down deep. They spread many, many feet and yards away. And so what happens is we have something that's a root, it just grows. And so we start with the roots of restlessness. And so if we go through the different days lesson, we'll discuss the various different reasons why human beings are so restless. Let's start actually with one of the dichotomies of Jesus' ministry. And Sunday's lesson, it talks about Jesus brings division. If somebody could look up Matthew 10, verse 34, just start reading. I don't know if we'll read all of it, but it brings one of the puzzling things about some of the messages that Jesus gave during his ministry on earth here.
Matthew 10:34.
Yes.
Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I am not come to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it.
Yeah, thank you. And so those are some heavy words. They're actually very disturbing, aren't they? When Jesus says, I came to bring a sword, what does that tell you? We just heard another place, he said, come unto me, all you are who labor and are heavy laden, I'll bring you rest. But here he's saying, I bring you a sword.
I think it's on.
Yeah.
I think Jesus is trying to tell us to make choices, to whether love ourselves or to love Him. I think there's an element of choice, and I think because we are generally selfish, we always think of ourselves first. So I think there is a choice that He's making us aware of.
Yes, yes. And the choice is actually somewhat simple. I think if we choose Jesus, we will find rest. And it's sometimes hard for us to understand that. But I think in what he's trying to tell us is if you choose this world, you'll never be satisfied. You will always be restless because there will always be something that does not bring you peace. So it's a choice we make that we have to forsake things of this world. And that's something I've always found difficult here where he says, he who loves his father and mother more than me, or he who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Does anyone else find that disturbing? Yeah. Tell us why you don't find that disturbing.
I think here Jesus is trying to say that the word hate means to love less, not to hate. I don't think Jesus ever teach us to hate. So I think we have to interpret this hate as to love yourself less than you love God.
Yeah, I think it's something that I think that it's hard for us sometimes in our human concept of love. It's a lot easier for us to love someone we see and we know. And I think we need to see God, in our mind's eye and know God. And if we really did, I think we would love God more than we love our parents, love our time. I mean, what did Jesus do for us? He died. He sacrificed his life. He sacrificed his divinity, his life in heaven. And, that's the ultimate, the purest and highest form of love. So we can just, in our small human way, try to return that a bit.
There's an Arab Bedouin proverb that goes, I against my brothers and I against my cousins, I, my brothers and my cousins against the world. And the interpretation of this proverb is that we always find ways to quarrel with those that we're around, but we'll sometimes we'll draw a circle around the people that are like us when we get into a quarrel with other people. So I'll have a quarrel against my brother, but then if it's a larger quarrel, it'll be my brother and I against, the cousins. If it's even larger, it's going to be my entire family against the world. And when I read Matthew chapter 10 here, I see Jesus saying, I need to be in that innermost circle. And I want to be it so that every single quarrel that you get into, you're on Jesus' side of that quarrel, whether it's against your parents or your in-laws, or that you always want to be on the same side of Jesus in every single quarrel.
Absolutely. And, that's an Arab Bedouin saying, but, we have the American saying that blood is thicker than water. And, we know how that's, sometimes, your siblings, you take them for granted. But then when it's really an important or dangerous or whatever situation, yeah, blood is thicker than water. And then, of course, we have to think about Jesus' blood, that binds us to Jesus. And he should be as one of us in our tight circle of family. So when we talk about one of the roots of restlessness, moving on to Monday's topic, is selfishness. And we all know we are born selfish. We can see it in babies and children. we think about ourselves first. That's our natural human inclination. What can we do? I mean, we try to help our children learn to share. That's a difficult concept. But how are ways that we can practice unselfishness? How do we show that we're selfish, actually? It's just when we wake up in the morning. I mean, everything we do, I guess, is centered around ourselves. It's hard to avoid yourself. You live with yourself, you wake up with yourself, you look in the mirror, you see yourself. So it's something we have to struggle and pray about. One of the many things that I think God can help us. But what are some things I think that we can try?
Ellen White gave an example of a prayer to pray. First thing in the morning was, I lay all my plans at your feet. Use me today in your service. So if our first thoughts are not about ourselves, but about God, that's possibly a way we could start down the right track. Otherwise, human nature just takes over.
It takes over.
It's us.
Yeah. And I think I like what you said about praying and thinking about God first, because the secular view of social justice is good. I mean, it accomplishes a lot of good, feeding the homeless, things like that. But the root of that has to be with God, with God's love, because in and of ourselves, we can go through the motions and, we can do good deeds and good acts, but really the root of unselfishness and of compassion comes from God. So one of the many stories in about Jesus' ministry talks about in Mark, somebody coming and asking how they're going to divide their inheritance with their brother. And then he talks about, he likes to talk about rich people and the foolish things that they do. But that's one thing that we in the Western world really have to fight actively against, is this sense of wanting to accumulate goods, because it's just so easy for us. Now with online shopping, with relatively cheap goods, we can just accumulate things. So what does these material goods, what do they do for you? They fill up your garage. Anytime, in our house included, we see cars parked outside the house, we figure the garage is full. Yeah, there's just a tendency to buy things. And we're of the generation, I think most of us, we haven't lived through, I know we have our own hardships, but we talk about like the Depression generation, like Jim's parents. And so they saved everything. They were very sparing in what they bought, because they realized how precious and how things could disappear on you. And that's something that we really haven't experienced in the last 50 plus years. And so we if you think about it, all your material possessions could be taken away in an instant for whatever reason. 2 years ago, there were fires up in our hills, and we got a call that we were supposed to evacuate. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll start packing. Well, then I looked outside the window and I saw this orange glow, and I thought, okay, let's jump in the car right now. And so you always think, what should I take? So I took my laptop and my toothbrush, and that's about it. And Jim, I think, took the same thing. So we thought, okay, we'll be back the next day. So we ended up staying out for 4 days. Every day we checked, no, they wouldn't let you back. They wouldn't let you back. So then you realize how easily all your material goods could be taken. And I would be thinking, oh, maybe I should have grabbed this and grabbed that. But Yeah, so it is, even though we've had a relatively peaceful life for the last 50 plus years, things could get taken. And we know people that have had their house burned down, and so those material goods can be taken away very quickly. Um, so that's why we have to remind ourselves, that should not be our goal. Should not be our goal to accumulate material wealth. Because what do they say? You can't take it with you. You can't take it with you. And the other thing that we also need to remind ourselves, just like what Carol said in Philippians, of course, this beautiful set of verses about Christ and what he did. Somebody could read Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8.
Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God did not consider robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of man. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross.
So these verses just really drive home the point about Jesus being the total epitome of unselfishness. I mean, coming from his throne in heaven, which we can't even imagine how glorious it is, and becoming a bond servant with basically no material possessions. Not only no material possessions, no respect. Even, he was despised. And not only obedient to the point of death, but even death on the cross, which was the ultimate, the worst kind of death, the worst disgraceful kind of death, reserved for the very bottom rung. So if you ponder that, it helps to put things in perspective. It really does, about what's important and what we should make our priorities. We should become more Christ-like, be willing to give up material possessions and wealth, sacrifice for others, because that's what Jesus did. So this is an interesting topic in Tuesday's lessons on ambition. And ambition it can be a good thing. And we all know the story of the Last Supper. When Jesus knew what was happening, right? He was very somber. He knew this was his last meal. He knew what was going to happen in the next 24 hours. And he had tried for 3 years to tell his disciples that was what's going to happen. And they totally missed it, went over their heads. So what were they talking about at the Last Supper? Who would be the greatest? Who would sit at his right hand and left hand? Who would be his deputy? Is that surprising? Sometimes, what we do, even the way we raise our kids, it sometimes flies in the face of the gospel. But we have to figure out a way. I mean, we send our children to school. We want them to do well. We want them to learn, to gain skills and knowledge, gain a profession. Is that ambition? That's ambition. That's seeking to have success in this world. And yet, what did Jesus say in his ministry? The first shall be last, the last shall be first, become like a little child. So how do you resolve living and accomplishing and achieving things in this life as a Christian?
I once heard a sermon where the pastor was talking about Judas's position in the Last Supper.
Mm-hmm.
He was pointing out that we know that John was leaning against Jesus in the Last Supper, but Jesus, on the other side, he has Judas immediately next to him. And the pastor was saying all throughout Jesus' ministry, Jesus already knew who would betray him.
Yeah.
But Jesus was still working to knock on Judas's heart. He pointed out that Jesus told a total of about 38 parables in total. And if you look at the topics of those parables, the most common topic was that many of these parables touched on stewardship, managing of money, managing of worldly possessions. And we know that this was one of Judas's character flaws. He was ambitious, and he also had a hard time with his honesty with money. And so even at the Last Supper, when he could have had John on one side and Peter on the other side, people who would survive the night, right? Jesus is sitting there in Judas's bosom, and even when he knows that Judas is the one that's going to betray him, and other disciples are asking, is it me? Jesus is trying to not protect Judas's pride, but not wound him to the point where Judas would push Jesus out at that point. And so I think thinking about ambition in the gospel, just thinking about this little vignette of how Jesus delicately and persistently for years tries to work with the most ambitious of us to try to tone down our worldly ambition. The other thing that I find interesting about Jesus' ministry when it comes to ambition is the way that he treated the rich young ruler.
Mm-hmm.
The rich young ruler, in the disciples' eyes, was qualified to be a disciple. They were imagining that Jesus would set up a worldly kingdom, and the Messiah could do well with having people in his wings that were like the rich young ruler. One of the things that Jesus tells the rich young ruler is that he needs to take all of his stuff and give it away to the poor. And Jesus is intentionally saying to give it to the poor because had the rich young ruler donated his things, liquidated his assets and donated it to Jesus, the rich young ruler would then be able to say, I am entitled to have this position because I bought into the company's stock, right?
Yes, yes.
But instead, Jesus is saying, if you want to be my disciple, you have to deny any qualifications, any ambition. You get in at the bottom floor just like everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. It's a difficult paradox that I think we see in the spreading of the gospel and in church and religion. So organized religion is dying in the Western countries. And I think it's because the material trappings of the world are very tempting. So of course, it's growing like wildfire in third world countries where they are looking for a better life. They're looking for something better than what they have. And it's much easier to reach people who feel a need than people who feel like they have everything. But we somehow still, I like what you said, we still have to reach them. It's just like Jesus was trying to still reach Judas up until the very end. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. How do we resolve this? Basically, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, it flies in the face of everything the world represents. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn. I think we've talked this before. If the Western world, were to create a set of Beatitudes about who is blessed, blessed are the rich, blessed are the good looking, blessed are the ones who are really good in sports, because that's what Western society values. But we have to remind ourselves what the real important values are, and that's the paradox that we have to live. We have to live in this world, so we do need, education. We need to live like a civilized person. We need to have a certain job, profession, career, whatever. So it's not like we need to put everything aside. So I think the issue is what comes first. What's our highest priority? Highest priority should be our love for God, and the other things can fall in place, and we have to recognize that they are not as important. So it's hard to do. It's hard to do. You get caught up in daily life. We all do. It gets busy, and you think, I got to do this, I got to do this, got to go this place. But we have to remind ourselves, and this is where our daily walk with Christ comes in. We have to remind ourselves what's really important. Remind ourselves what Christ did for us, humbling himself in the form of a servant. And we have to remind ourselves that our time on this earth is limited. I mean, we're living longer than ever, but everyone dies. That is the reality. And it is a small blip. our lives are small blips when we look at the all of eternity. And so that's what our goal and our priorities are to be for our eternal life. And then it makes things, settle down a little bit more in perspective. But yeah, ambition when it's outside of ambition that is a ruthless, overarching ambition that doesn't allow God to work in our lives, I think it will bring ruin. I mean, it may bring some external trappings of success, but that's all it'll be, external. So Wednesday's lesson gets into what I think is a very hot topic among Christians, among any religious organization, because I think it's one of the roots as to why the church doesn't grow like we wish it would sometimes. What is the main reason you think that people leave the church? So I don't think it takes any great research study. I don't think people leave because of a doctrinal disagreement. Sometimes they do. It's usually a personal issue. They got their feelings hurt, or they got angry, or they got offended by a personal interaction with a church member.
It's
You have a
interesting.
story?
You brought that. I
Go
was
ahead, yeah.
looking for the features for Sabbath
Uh-huh.
school. I looked that up this week
Oh,
from
okay.
a GC survey, and they listed the top 20.
Yeah.
And 13 out of the top 20 all have to do with personal relationships.
Yeah.
And then I can't help but thinking, we criticize the disciples. They said they lived with Jesus every minute for
Mhm.
3 years. We criticize the Jewish leadership of that time. Aren't we kind of doing the same thing?
Well, that
my
is what's very disturbing to me. When I read, if we look at Matthew 23, and Jesus is talking specifically about the Pharisees, the Sadducees. So who were they? They were the religious elite. They were the educated ones. They were the wealthy ones. They were the ones who were the leaders. That's what we were supposed to be, actually. and yet, what does he call them? He calls them very nasty things. And of course, it's very offensive to them. But I take that message, painfully, because I do worry and I'm concerned that we can come across that way. I hear frequently from young people about the hypocrisy in the church, and I can't disagree. It's hard. I mean, it's very hard because we're all human beings. Our leaders are human beings trying to do the best, and yet nobody is perfect. And so, we see flaws in our fellow church members and our leaders. What do we do about it?
I think I see two situations. One, where a person comes into a church thinking, how can this is a worship experience. I'm here to worship. I'm also here to serve. How can I come and worship God and bless others today in this worship service? Where the other situation might be somebody comes and they need to get fed.
Mhm.
And they say, I want to get something out of this service today. And I think sometimes if someone is coming in with more of a selfish aspect, and they're wanting to get something from this service, I mean, and it's valid. We
Mhm.
do get blessings from the service. We get fed. But I think sometimes if they're looking for what they can get out of the service, they might be sometimes disappointed from interpersonal relationships there, and they might get offended or not feel like they're getting what they want out
Yeah,
of the service.
It's kind of a delicate line sometimes because, we always say we don't go to church to get entertained, but in some sense we do. I mean, Um, and then we still, I think a way to keep people in the church is to get people involved and make them feel like they're needed, and they are. I mean, especially a small church like ours, they're needed, they're appreciated, but then we don't want to overwork them either. So it's it's tough. Uh, but I think that forming, if for example, we had an evangelistic meeting and maybe 10 people got baptized and they just came to church, if they didn't make any friends here and if they didn't start to participate, they're not going to stay. They just won't. So I think people are willing to forgive a little hypocrisy if there's some genuine compassion and caring. I mean, we all have flaws. We know our friends have flaws. The better the friend, the better we know their flaws. That's why husbands and wives know each other's flaws. So, but we forgive all that. We accept that because we have a good relationship. And I think that's something that we need to invest in. Yes, go ahead, please.
One of the attitudes that Jesus was trying to combat against was actually a justification that the Pharisees used of Jesus's, the Sadducees that uses justification. That's better for one person to die on behalf of the nation than for the whole nation to pass away for Jesus' sake. The modus operandi of the Pharisees was motivated by the Babylonian captivity, because after the Babylonian captivity, the scholars basically reasoned that the reason why they went into captivity was because they were not keeping God's law
Yes, to the letter.
to the letter,
Mhm.
and that the reason why they continued to be under Roman occupation was because Israel was not following all of the laws of the Old Testament. If you study the Mishnah, the teachings of the Jewish rabbis in the centuries after Jesus, they write that if the whole nation were able to keep one Sabbath,
Mhm.
well, they first said if they keep 2 Sabbaths in a row perfectly, Messiah will immediately appear. And then later on, they backed it off to say if the whole nation were to keep 1 Sabbath
Yeah.
to the letter perfectly, Messiah would immediately appear. And so in Jesus' day, the Pharisees were very, very severe on keeping all of Israel to the letter,
Yes.
in hopes that then Jesus would then show up and save them from the Romans. So when Jesus does show up, they say Jesus is making it hard for us to get the Messiah to show up. So it's better that we cast out Jesus to save the nation.
Mhm.
I think today, oftentimes we fall into the same trap where we will see people coming into the church, and these new believers, as they come in, they'll say, we need to, make sure these new people are behaving perfectly, otherwise new people won't come in. When we have the new people coming in every day.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the things that Jesus said to the Pharisees, like I said, I take them, they love, let's see, where do we start? Yeah, they love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplace and be called by men rabbi. And then later on, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, and there's all these woes. You fools and blind men. So this is very, very, very strongly worded. Talking about tithing, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. So do we need to? So what are Seventh-day Adventists known for? And is it a good thing? So what I'm afraid is what Seventh-day Adventists are known for is for going to church on Saturday and being vegetarian. Now, is that what we want to be known for? Yeah, it's got the.
Jesus said, "You'd know that they're my disciples if they love one another."
Yeah, yeah. We would rather be known for our love, our service. Yes, go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, what we're known for is for being legalistic.
Yes,
Okay,
that's the
for
word.
talking about the importance of the commandments, but we don't adequately and we don't lovingly present why we keep the commandments. People have, other people, and even ourselves, have an unfortunate understanding of our relationship with God as a church. And quickly, I want to go back to talking about the Pharisees that our young brother brought up. We have to wonder, why did the people of that time fall under the enchantment and the power of the Pharisees? If you read what Jesus said, all these things that, people knew that they were hypocrites,
Yeah.
but why did they continue to give them authority and power? Part of that is history, as you were mentioning, is that without the forefathers of the Pharisees, the Jews probably would have lost their identity. And they kept them close to a form of worship of God, but they took it to a far distant place where it was never meant to be.
Yeah, and the other unfortunate thing we're sometimes known for, based on some of the evangelistic meetings, is being anti-Catholics, the beast. And I just mentioned that because I have been reading a couple books by Father Gregory Boyle. People from LA would all remember or understand. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries, and his stories are so inspiring. He works with the gangs in downtown LA. He's baptized them, he's buried them, and his words just they have so much compassion, and even more than that, he lives among them. And I thought, wow, Catholics sometimes get a bad rap, the scandals they've had, and then at the University of California recently, there was a big brouhaha because the university health systems wanted to ally themselves with Catholic health services. And of course, the liberal professors are against that because of all of the religious directives that apply to healthcare. So yeah, the Catholics sometimes get a bad rap, but just reading his book, you read about one man's compassion, and really, I think he lived the love of God in his life. And I thought, wow, that moves us on to we'll wrap up in the next few minutes. How do we uproot this restlessness, this hypocrisy, this selfishness? And we all know these verses in John 14. Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. So what does Jesus tell us, or why should we not be restless and troubled? Yes.
My wife and I were taking a walk, I think in March, and we ran into two missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I studied with them for several weeks, and they invited me to come to their ward one Sunday. I was in they divide every other week. They divided up so that their Sunday school is just men only.
Uh-huh.
And the fellow that was giving the lesson was a ex-seminary professor for the Mormon Church. And as he was teaching the lesson, he was touching on having assurance of salvation or exaltation in their church. And if you get into the nuances of it, basically Jesus saves everybody in Mormon theology. But in order to determine which of three heavens you go to, it comes down to your performance in this life. And the professor was saying that he had taught classes with missionaries, 40 missionaries in the classroom. And he asked them, everybody put your head down. How many of you believe that it is possible for you to go to the highest heaven? Every hand went up. And they said, put your head down, hands down. How many of you honestly, sincerely believe in your hearts that you will go to the heaven based off of your works? And these are all, elite,
Yeah.
no hands went up. And they said, well, come on, guys. Like, you guys, you've done your missionary service, you pay your tithes, you have your temple recommends, and it goes through all the list, and no hands went up. He says, surely there must be somebody.
Yeah.
And after he asked the third time, one hand went up. And somebody, as I'm sitting there and there's, 30 guys in the room with me as we're listening to this man tell the stories, one guy asks him, because he's very uncomfortable with this. He says, why is it that in the Mormon church, we struggle with our assurance of salvation and we never feel like we're doing enough, whereas every other Protestant denomination seems to be able to rest in Jesus? And I asked, he didn't get a satisfactory answer during the class, but I asked him afterwards, and I thought it was amazing the concession that he made. He said, in the Mormon church, the problem that we have is that we recognize that Jesus did everything for us, and then we leave him behind and we go on trying to live this life
Live your
without
life
him.
of good works.
Yes, and I think that, that's what this lesson, this whole quarter is bringing up, that many of us in our past, maybe in our teenage years, is that we accept Jesus Christ. We recognize that it's all about Jesus. We get baptized. We understand that. We remember that for a little while, and then we move on with our lives and we leave him behind.
Yeah.
Where we really need to just stay at the foot of the cross and never let selfish ambition to pull us away from it.
And I think we've talked about before that the hardest thing is to do nothing. And that's what Jesus is asking us to do. Not to follow all the 600 laws about keeping the Sabbath, but to rest in him. And by resting in him, this is the leap of faith. By resting in him, we will be able to do those things without considering it like works. I haven't figured out how to do that, but I think that's the goal, is to rest in Jesus, and then the rest will come. It's something that, again, we fight against our human nature. In some sense, it's easier to keep those laws to the letter. The 10 Commandments we talked about. It's pretty easy. I think I can go all day without killing somebody. The lies, okay, if you don't count the white lies, I can go all day without lying. I could go all day without committing adultery. But it's the hardest is to give up yourself and rest in Jesus. That's the hardest task. Go ahead, Stu.
I think you were saying that it's very hard to rest in Jesus sometimes. I think the reason why we're not resting in Jesus is because we rest in ourselves.
Yeah.
We are so preoccupied with ourselves, how to gain recognition, how to have personal gain and personal glorification. We don't rest ourselves, so we don't rest on Jesus. So we're so stingy with our time, our money, our possession. We keep everything. So from what I study from this lesson is that if we more importantly stress on giving our love, the love, the kindness that we give, unconditional, always giving, then we can spread this love, and that is what I think keeps people in church. If people come to your church and they feel love, they will stay.
Yes.
I think love is the unknown quantity that we forgot to sort of.
Yeah, we can't follow a rule. I mean, we can though. I mean, that was what Jesus said. The greatest commandment of all, and to love God and to love your neighbor. But it's easier for us to follow these mundane rules than to actually have the true love of God, and that's what we need to really strive for, make that our priority in order to have true rest. So yeah, let's just wrap up. I think we need to close in the next couple minutes, and I think we've covered. We're naturally restless, and the only way to find rest is in Jesus. And to find rest in Jesus, we have to put aside ourselves, our ambitions, our material goods, and just make him the center of our lives. I'll just read here Ellen White, just a couple lines here from Christ Object Lessons. There can be no growth or fruitfulness in the life that is centered in self. If you have accepted Christ as a personal Savior, you are to forget yourself and try to help others. Talk of the love of Christ, tell of his goodness, etc. So I think that's really very, very sound advice inspired advice from Ellen White, is that we have to put aside ourselves and let Christ fill our lives. Any other comments? Anybody tired of being ambitious, hypocritical, and selfish? Yes.
Maybe somebody already mentioned this, but one of the best antidotes, I think, to selfishness is to have children. And once you have children, you just realize you're not the most important person anymore. And maybe that's why God gave us the privilege of having children. And for those who have had a chance, it does automatically makes us think of ourselves at least as second or third important.
Yeah.
We asked earlier whether it was disturbing that the disciples were talking about who's the greatest
Mhm.
after being with Jesus for 3 years. Jesus being the best communicator we can imagine,
I know.
but they didn't get the message until they saw that he would die for them, that he really was unselfish.
That's true. That's right. Okay, let's bow our heads for a quick word of prayer so that we can break for church. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for being with us during the discussion. Help us to really accept and cherish your gift of rest. And help us to put aside our selfish ambitions and let you fill our lives so we can show your love to others. Be with us as we go to the divine service. Help us to gain a blessing from the message from the pastor. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.